Imagine spending years surrounded by people, but feeling completely invisible. You walk through the same streets every night. You watch strangers laugh, love, and live their lives, while you remain only a spectator. Then one night you meet someone. For the first time, someone listens to you, and suddenly you begin to believe, maybe I was never meant to be alone. But what if that person was never truly yours? What if you didn't fall in love with them, but with the idea of being loved? This is the psychological mystery hidden inside Fyodor Dostoevsky's White Nights. And the most painful part of the story isn't that the protagonist loses the woman he loves. It's that he discovers how badly he needed, before understanding White Nights, we need to understand the man who wrote it. Fyodor Dostoevsky was obsessed with one question. What happens inside the human mind when a person is lonely, desperate, guilty, hopeful, or emotionally broken? His characters aren't simply good or bad. They contradict themselves. They desire love, but sometimes destroy it. They want freedom, but become prisoners of their own minds. Dostoevsky himself experienced imprisonment, extreme psychological pressure, poverty, and deep personal struggles. These experiences shaped the way he observed human beings. And in White Nights, he doesn't create a grand political revolution. Instead, he creates something much quieter, something many people experience but rarely admit: loneliness. The story takes place in St. Petersburg during the famous White Nights, a period when summer nights remain unusually bright, and Dostoevsky uses this setting symbolically. It's night, but it never becomes completely dark. Just like the protagonist, he lives in emotional darkness, yet his imagination is constantly alive. The unnamed narrator is a lonely young man. He doesn't really belong to society. He walks through the city alone. He has conversations with buildings. He gives personalities to streets. He creates relationships inside his imagination. And this tells us something important about his psychology. When reality doesn't give us enough emotional connection, the mind sometimes creates its own world. He isn't simply physically alone. He is psychologically isolated. The narrator describes himself as a dreamer. But what does that really mean? He doesn't actively participate in life. He watches it. He imagines conversations. He imagines relationships. He imagines happiness. But imagination is safe. Reality is dangerous. In imagination, rejection doesn't exist. In imagination, nobody can abandon you. You control everything. And this is one of the most important psychological ideas in White Nights. Sometimes loneliness becomes comfortable. A person can become so accustomed to isolation that real human connection starts to feel frightening. The dreamer has built an emotional shelter inside his imagination. But then, someone enters his real life, and everything changes. One night, the narrator sees a young woman named Nastenka. She is standing alone and crying. He approaches her. At first, their relationship is simply a conversation between two lonely people. But something changes very quickly. They begin meeting again, and the narrator starts experiencing something he has almost never experienced before: connection. Someone is waiting for him. Someone is listening. Someone remembers him. For a person who has lived inside loneliness for years, that feeling can become extremely powerful. And this is where the psychology becomes darker. Because the narrator doesn't just begin to like Nastenka. He begins to build an entire future around her. This is the question Dostoevsky wants us to ask. Is the narrator actually in love with Nastenka, or is he in love with what she represents? She represents companionship, acceptance, hope, a way out of loneliness. The narrator has spent years dreaming about having someone, and suddenly Nastenka appears, so his feelings become intense almost immediately. But healthy love requires knowing the person. The narrator barely knows her. Instead, he fills the gaps with imagination. He doesn't simply see Nastenka. He sees the future he has always dreamed about. And that's psychologically dangerous. Because when we fall in love with an imagined version of someone, We aren't necessarily loving the person. We're loving our own fantasy. But Nastenka isn't simply a love interest. She is lonely, too. She's emotionally trapped in her own situation. She has been waiting for another man, the man she loves. He promised to return, and she is waiting. This creates a painful psychological parallel. The narrator is waiting for Nastenka. Nastenka is waiting for another man. Everyone is waiting for someone who may not choose them. And suddenly the story becomes bigger than romance. It becomes a story about human beings searching for validation. We want someone to say, "You matter to me." Sometimes we don't even need the perfect person. We simply need proof that we are not invisible. And this is where White Knights quietly criticizes society. The narrator doesn't fit comfortably into ordinary social life. He doesn't have a strong social circle. He doesn't participate in the normal patterns of relationships. He observes people instead of becoming part of their world. Dostoevsky shows us something uncomfortable. A society can be full of people and still produce lonely individuals. You can walk through a crowded street and still feel completely alone. You can live among thousands of people and have nobody who truly knows you. This makes White Knights surprisingly modern, because loneliness isn't always about physical isolation. Sometimes it's about emotional disconnection. Then comes the moment the dream begins to collapse. Nastenka's love returns. The man she has been waiting for finally appears. And the narrator realizes something devastating. The relationship he imagined was never actually his. For a short time, he had created an entire emotional world, and now reality destroys it in seconds. But notice something important. Dostoevsky doesn't turn the narrator into a villain. He doesn't make him angry. He doesn't make him revengeful. Instead, he lets him experience the strange tragedy of being grateful for something that hurt him. Because those few nights gave him something he had never truly experienced: happiness. Even if it was temporary. The ending is painful because the narrator doesn't completely reject the experience. He remembers those nights as something beautiful, and this creates one of Dostoevsky's deepest psychological ideas. A temporary connection can permanently change a lonely person. The narrator returns to his old life. The same streets, the same loneliness, the same dreams, but he is no longer exactly the same person. Because